Right then, welcome to the second episode of this multi-part series. So in this episode, we'll be basically seeing the overall architecture of NgRx, and we'll be also seeing how to basically create a root reducer in your app module.ts. Alright. So firstly, going over the architecture. So this is how the overall architecture looks. It might look complicated now, but the thing is, let's break it down. I mean, using an example. Okay. So using the current example, let's say we have an employee list. Okay. So let's go over the overall architecture here. So let's say we begin from our view employees list component. Okay, so now let's just assume for now that we have an employees array within this component. Okay, so now what you have to do is you want to store all the employees in the redux store. Okay, so the way you will do it is you will basically dispatch an action first. Okay, this action will be called, say, load or employees. Okay, so this load employees action will actually talk to the reducer. Okay, so there will be a reducer named as load employees, and this reducer will take in an input which is basically your employees array. Okay, and once it has the employees array, it will go and push it in the redux store. Okay, so now the redux store will have the employees array now, right? So now once it is dumped in the redux store, the selector is basically fetching it from the store. Its only job and the primary job is to fetch things from the redux store. Okay, and once it has fetched all the details, that's the employee details, it will pass it back to the component. So this is the cyclic pattern it will follow. Okay, so the component will load all the employees using an action. The action will talk to the reducer. The reducer will go and store it in the redux store. So once anything is stored in the redux store, the selector basically has subscribed to the NgRx store. Okay, so now as it's subscribed, so any changes to the store will always be notified to the selector, right? So the selector, once it has all the details, it will pass it back to the component. Okay, so now I know we haven't discussed the right hand side. So now let's bring in the effects and service and the database, okay, into this. So NgRx is like an in-memory database which is there on the UI, right? So now let's consider now that the component in hand, I mean, in that component, we do not have any employee details at all. Okay. So what we essentially do is, if we did not have an NgRx store, we would be calling what I call a Java endpoint, and then getting all the details via a service, and the service will pass it back to the component. There is no middle man. As we see here, so NgRx is like a middle layer between the actual Java service and our UI, right? So the thing is, let's consider the component does the same thing here, wherein let's say it's fetching all the employee details first. Then what it will do is it will dispatch an action called as fetch employees. Okay, so the fetch employees in this case, we did not write anything in the reducer because we don't have any details in the fetch employees, right? We don't really have the employee details with us. So the action fetch employees will actually talk to the effect. Okay, this effect will basically call a service which will fetch all the employee details for us. Okay, so this service will basically get these details from the existing database, and once it has employee details, once it has fetched all the details, this service will return it back to the effect. Okay, now in the effect, the only way we can store something within the redux store is via an action and a reducer. So if you see in the diagram, the reducer is the only block which talks to the store. There's no other way through which we can update the redux store, right? So the service will return the data to the effects. The effects now will in turn dispatch an action which we previously discussed as load employees, right? So now this load, and it will also pass in all the employee details as a property or as a parameter, right? So this action will go ahead and talk to the reducer. The reducer will go ahead and update the redux store, and as soon as the redux store is updated, the selector will fetch all the details and pass it back to the component. So this component will basically help in displaying all the employee details that is available. All right. Okay. So now we'll move ahead and do a very basic, NGRX. We'll learn a basic NGRX syntax as to how a root reducer looks like in our program. So let's do that quickly. So now what we'll do is we'll create a root reducer for our project. So in this diagram, you see there are many components in the NgRx architecture like the reducer, action, selector, effects. So we saw none of them in our project, right? So what we'll do is, firstly, what we have done is in the previous video, we have already configured the store module in the store dev tools, right? But if you see our current app state, that's the current state is actually empty. Okay, so instead of defining it here, and as and when our application grows, the app state is going to scale, right? So what we can do is we can define this elsewhere, right? And if you saw in the diagram, the only way we can update an NgRx store or a Redux store is via the reducer, right? So what we'll do is we'll create a root reducer for our project. Okay, so the way you do it is, at app component level, you first create a store folder, and within that you create an index.ts file, which will basically denote the root reducer. What you will do is you will first create an interface for the whole app state. Okay, this will be blank for now, but going ahead, we'll fill in all the details within the app state, right? Also, we can create the root reducer using root export constant root reducer equal to, and this will be of type action reducer map. Okay, and you have to give a type to the reducer. So as it's a global reducer, we'll give it of type app state. Okay, so currently it will be empty. Okay, but going ahead, if there are any reducers, you can combine those. I mean, you can put all the reducers within this. Okay, so now what you will do is you will copy this, you will go to app module, you will remove this, and you can put root reducers here. You can just say import it from store. Okay, now this is compiled. If I refresh this, if I go to inspect, and if I go to the Redux plugin, okay, so you see the raw state is still empty. So what we have done is, instead of defining the app state in the app module itself, we have actually moved it from the app module to something called as an index.ts, where we have defined the reducer. All right. Okay, so we'll end this video here, and in the next lecture, what we'll be seeing is we'll be actually seeing how to create our first ever action, and we'll be also seeing how to basically lazy load a feature in under the main app state. Okay, so those are the two things we'll be seeing in the next lecture. So if you like this video, if you like the content, do like, do share, and do subscribe to my channel. Thank you.